heard it said in a recent video, it was the CNN Finding Jesus, where someone said, there are no physical descriptions of Jesus in the Bible whatsoever, none. And that couldn't be farther from the truth. So I want to clarify that right now in this video, and we want to talk about the Shroud of Turin as being the witness to the resurrection. We want to get focused in on that aspect of it. But at the same time, we're also going to go over in the Bible where there are physical descriptions of Jesus. And in Mark 15:46 in the English Standard Version, this is what it says exactly. Joseph bought a linen shroud. Taking him down, wrapped him in the linen shroud. In another translation, it says, Joseph bought a long sheet of linen. So if the man on the shroud is Jesus, he needs to be wrapped in what? He needs to be wrapped in a linen shroud, in a long sheet of linen. For deeper insight into physical descriptions of Jesus, we need to look at preceding events. Everything that happens in the Old Testament happens again in New Testament. For example, Samson and Jesus, their lives mirror each other in many different ways, both born of a supernatural / miraculous type birth. The mother of Samson was barren. Samson is betrayed for money. Jesus betrayed for money. Samson is big, strong, muscular. Jesus is what? A carpenter, a lumberjack, in very good physical shape. Samson has long hair. Jesus has long hair. At the end of Samson's life, he's between two pillars with his arms outstretched and his head bowed down. Jesus dies in a very similar manner. He is in between two crosses. His arms are also outstretched, head bowed down, in a very victorious moment, but also very humbling. But Judges 13:5 is a preceding event to the birth of Jesus. For behold, you shall conceive and give birth to a son, and no razor shall come upon his head. So that's the Spirit of God actually commanding, do not cut the hair of that child. Obviously, the Spirit of God does not think it is a shame or a disgrace in any way for a man to have long hair. Right? So that gives us insight into a physical description of Jesus. 1, he has the body of a carpenter. 2, he has what? He has long hair. This next passage is directly related to the Shroud of Turin, to the burial shroud, the mantle of Jesus. Kings, 2 letter 2:13. He also took up the mantle of Elijah that fell from him and returned and stood by the bank of the Jordan. When Elijah was taken up into heaven, his mantle fell off of him. A mantle and a shroud are basically the same thing. A mantle is a long, wide band of cloth worn by a high priest. It's an outer garment that you wear, and you are also buried in it. When you die, you are buried in your mantle / shroud. It becomes your burial shroud. And that's the only thing that Elijah left behind. And then he vanished, right? He vanishes into heaven. And the Roman soldiers obviously didn't buy the story. So they searched for him for how many days? 3 days. And the only thing they got from Elijah, the only physical piece of evidence that he was even on this earth, was his mantle, his shroud. What is it? That's a preceding event to what happens with Jesus. Jesus also vanishes. And what does he leave behind? Just like Elijah, his mantle, his shroud, a long, wide band of cloth used by a high priest. And wow, what is Jesus? Jesus is the new high priest. Yeah. Is it starting to hit home? The Shroud of Turin is what? The Shroud of Turin is what? The witness to the resurrection. All right, we're going to build a DNA profile based on the physical descriptions of Jesus in the Old Testament and the New Testament, going all the way back to Genesis 3:15, when it states that the heel of Jesus would be struck, that the nail wound would go in the heel. On each point, each physical description, each thing, we will make a line, a white line, on the DNA fingerprint that you see on the screen. Because many of the physical descriptions of Jesus are in the form of wounds that are in specific places on the body, so too is the white line on the DNA fingerprint in a specific place. And of course, each unique physical description will be given a name: crown of thorns, scourge wounds, legs not broke, and so on and so on. And then we'll do the same thing with the forensic evidence. Make a DNA fingerprint and then do a side-by-side comparison with the gospel account and the forensic evidence, and we're going to find out together if they match up. These are all the things a forensic detective would look for on the Shroud of Turin to find out, to know for certain, beyond a reasonable doubt, if the man in the shroud truly is Jesus. His heel should be struck, should be damaged, as in a spike, a nail driven into it, as in being crucified. And it is. Jesus should have long hair. He should have the body of a carpenter. Part of his beard should be plucked out. His cheeks should be struck. There should be swelling on the cheeks. His back should look like it's been plowed on. His body should look striped. By his stripes we are healed. His head should have puncture wounds in it. His hands and feet should be pierced. His body should be without clothes. The body should be wrapped in a linen shroud, a long sheet of linen, a fine linen. His legs should not be broken. His side should be pierced. There should be some trace evidence of myrrh and aloes on the cloth. There should be some trace evidence of vinegar. Jesus was offered vinegar. There should be no evidence of decomposition on the linen, because it says in Scripture, you will not allow your Holy One to undergo decay. According to the Gospel account, Jesus was in the tomb for 2 to 3 days, so there should be a slightly swelled stomach on the man of the shroud due to gas formation. That's forensic evidence that's saying, where the victim is speaking, I've been dead for 48 to 72 hours. So that tells us that the body is not decayed, has not undergone decay, but it's about to. If something doesn't happen quick, this body is going to start decomposing. So that's what the slightly swelled stomach tells us. And, of course, a forensic detective will be looking for that evidence on the Shroud of Turin. He or she would also be looking for abrasion and compression marks on the shoulders and the upper back area due to carrying a heavy weight, such as a cross. There should be trace pollen evidence on the linen. Pollens from Israel, pollens from Turkey, pollens going from Edessa, Turkey to Constantinople, and from Constantinople into France and into Turin, Italy. If the man in the shroud is Jesus, there should be pollens from a thistle or a thorn plant, something that would be used to construct a cap of thorns. In the garden tomb, the space in the garden tomb where the man was laid was for a person who was approximately 5'11". So a forensic detective is going to be looking at the height of the man in the shroud to see if he would fit in that space. He's going to be looking for the headcloth that's mentioned in the Gospel of John. Where is the headcloth? And the forensic evidence on that headcloth is going to need to match up with the Shroud of Turin. He's going to be looking for evidence of mineral deposits on the back of the shroud. If this was laying in a tomb, there should be some trace evidence, some mineral deposits left on the back of the shroud. He's going to be looking at the dimensions of the cloth. Is this in cubits? Because in first century time, the system of measurement was in cubits. He's going to be looking at the size, the dimensions of the shroud. And he or she will discover that it is 8 by 2 cubits, a Syrian cubit. He's also going to be looking for a linen strip or strips of linen, also mentioned in the Gospel of John. Is there a linen strip or strips that were also preserved? We'll be looking for evidence of that. And lo and behold, we have a DNA match. The Gospel account and the forensic evidence. I mean, if you bought a lottery ticket right now, we all know how hard it is to match 5 numbers on $1 million lottery. Imagine trying to match 30 numbers. Choosing 30 numbers out of 1,000. It wouldn't be 1 in several million chance, it would be 1 in several billion, like 1 in 282 billion. Calculated odds of probability and chance. Another person has the same DNA fingerprint, and the man in the shroud is not Jesus, is 1 in 282 billion. A DNA fingerprint is not unlike a lottery ticket with 10,000 different numbers on it, and then you choose 30 numbers. The calculated odds of probability and chance another person is going to choose those same 30 numbers is astronomical. 1 in several billion, meaning there's only going to be one winner in this lottery. Meaning specifically, the person that has this DNA fingerprint can only be one person. Based on scripture, based on what is written in the Bible. These are 30 different descriptions of Jesus, and we have put them in the form of numbers and made a DNA fingerprint. And we did the same thing with the forensic evidence on the shroud. So let's take a look and see what those 30 things are, those 30 descriptions, those 30 markers. Number 1, the heel has been struck with a spike. Number 2, the man has the body of a carpenter. Number 3, the man has a beard. Number 4, part of the beard is plucked out. Number 5, right cheek is swollen. Number 6, left cheek is swollen. Number 7, body is striped all over. Number 8, puncture wounds around the head. Number 9, hands are pierced. Number 10, bodies without clothes. Number 11, the man has long hair. Number 12, legs are not broken. Number 13, man has a post-mortem side wound. Number 14, back has been plowed on. Number 15, compression marks on the shoulders. Number 16, stomach is slightly swelled. Number 17, blood and water coming from the side wound. Number 18, evidence of vinegar on the linen. Number 19, body was wrapped in the linen shroud. Number 20, no evidence of decomposition. Number 21, there are mineral deposits at the back of the shroud consistent with a tomb. Number 22, there's a rare calcite from tombs and soil around the Damascus gate on the shroud. Number 23, pollens from Israel on the shroud. Number 24, pollens from Turkey on the shroud. Number 25, pollens from a thorn plant on the shroud. Number 26, evidence of a headcloth found in Spain. Number 27, a 14-foot strip of linen 3 inches wide was cut from the shroud and then sewed back on. Number 28, the dimensions of the shroud are in cubits. Number 29, trace evidence of myrrh and aloes on the shroud. And number 30, the man in the shroud is 5'11", and the space in the garden tomb is also 5'11". And when these 30 pieces of forensic evidence are put in the form of a DNA fingerprint, this is what it looks like. And it's a match to the biblical description of Jesus. It's a match to what's written in Scripture. Beyond any reasonable doubt, the man in the shroud is Jesus. Lines right up with what's written in Scripture, Isaiah 52:14. There is no other person in the world that matches this description with all these unique wounds in specific places. No less than 7 forensic pathologists and blood chemistry experts confirmed without doubt a genuine person who was dead, scourged, and crucified made contact with the linen, and the body was removed from the cloth before decomposition set in within 3 days. In the garden tomb, the space where the man was laid in that tomb is 5'11". The man in the shroud, of course, is what? He's 5'11". And the headcloth, all the forensic evidence on the headcloth in Spain matches the Shroud of Turin. Bear in mind, Jesus was not buried with this cloth on his head. It was removed and set off in a place in the tomb by itself. According to the forensic evidence on the Sudarium of Oviedo, the headcloth, the person whose head who made contact with the cloth was in a vertical position as in on a cross, and his head was leaned downward 70 degrees and 20 degrees to the right. Now let's go to John 19:30. And when he had received the drink, the vinegar, Jesus said, "It is finished." With that he bowed his head down and gave up the ghost. So the headcloth is applied to Jesus after he dies on the cross. This cloth covered a man's head for a period of only 2 hours, and then it was removed. So Jesus was not buried with this cloth. So they were able to determine that the cloth covered a man's head who first was in an upright position, and then the body was moved to a horizontal position face down. That is the only way the Spanish Center for Syndenology was able to replicate the bloodstains that you see on the Sudarium of Oviedo on screen right now. There is not only a lot of blood on the sudarium, but there is also an abundance of pulmonary edema fluid. When someone died on the cross, fluid would build up in their lungs, and then they would cough up that fluid. This was determined by the Spanish Center for Syndenology, who has conducted an extensive and immaculate forensic examination of this headcloth. The sudarium of Oviedo is also a witness to the resurrection. This is the napkin that was about his head, not lying with the linen cloth, but wrapped together in a place by itself. All right, we're going to note similarities between the Shroud of Turin and the sudarium of Oviedo. The first one are the bloodstain patterns are very similar. On the back of the head of the Shroud of Turin is a bloodstain that looks like a number 3. And then you go to the sudarium of Oviedo, and lo and behold, you have the same type of blood pattern that takes on the shape, a numerical shape, of the number 3. Now, what's significant is that the blood is type AB blood on the sudarium of Oviedo, same blood that's on the shroud. Same blood, same pollen, same rare calcite, murrinals on the cloth, pulmonary edema fluid on the cloth. I mean, the cloth was authenticated as the property of Jesus in the 11th century by the Spanish government. 120 points of facial recognition, points of congruency, 70 points that match on the front, 50 points that match on the back, 120. Beyond any reasonable doubt, the person whose head that made contact with the sudarium of Oviedo is the same person whose head made contact with the Shroud of Turin. The calcite, the rare calcite from the Damascus Gate that's on the tip of the nose of the Shroud of Turin is also on the sudarium. All right, so the person whose head made contact with the sudarium, also the tip of his nose also made violent contact with the ground outside the Damascus Gate. I mean, at some point you gotta wave the white flag. The sudarium is a known item of Jesus, so we're comparing it to the shroud in the same way you would get the dental records of someone to compare with their remains to make a positive ID. You know, somebody please direct me to where in the historical record another person had a Gundalia tornaforte plant put on their head. Somebody besides Jesus of Nazareth, because that's the only person in history that's ever been mocked and crucified as a king. And those pollens are on the sudarium of Oviedo. You know, it's not there by random coincidence. There are 120 points of facial recognition between the sudarium and the shroud that match. Points of congruency. That is better than dental records. That is a positive ID beyond any reasonable doubt. The man whose head made contact with the sudarium is the same man whose head made contact with the Shroud of Turin. All those things, those are all things that are great to know, okay? The man of the shroud, he died. He was scourged. He was crucified. He had a crown of thorns put on his head. They plowed on his back. He was literally a straight man. He's got the side wound. His legs aren't broken. You know, we know all those things. He was buried nude. He was wrapped in a linen shroud. But if we don't believe he's risen, it's all for nothing. Because our eternal inheritance, according to Scripture, if we don't believe he's risen, we will be condemned.
Those who believe and are baptized will be saved. Those who do not believe will be condemned, will be condemned, will be condemned.
Being condemned would mean being separated from light. Light and darkness cannot share the same space together. That's a scientific fact. Another scientific fact is that our DNA, your DNA, the person watching this video, as you're watching this, your DNA oscillates at approximately 2 billion cycles per second in the UV range. So what that means is in each second that passes, your DNA has emitted 2 billion photons of light. And that light that emits from you, from our DNA, is a laser-like light, a focused light. And coincidentally, the only method that was successful in reproducing the shroud image, the unique chemistry and physics of the shroud image, was done using UV laser light. So the same type of light that our DNA emits is the same type of light that was used, that was successful in recreating the shroud image. Essentially, we are all beings of light. It says in Scripture, we were created in God's image. God's image is what? Is light. One of the messages of the shroud is Jesus is saying, this can happen to you. You can be resurrected. You are also a being of light. The greater love we have for others, the brighter our light shines. But if we have at the end of the day, it's all about me and what I want type attitude, we don't shine anymore. In Scripture, when Moses is close to the Spirit of God, he becomes illuminated. Jesus at the Transfiguration, he becomes illuminated. At the time of the resurrection, Jesus returns back to his body in his original form of light. There's a prayer at the end of this video you can say that will make your DNA oscillate quicker with more velocity and strength and shine brighter. We got to wrap this up. May the spirit of good health, good fortune, and good cheer be with you. Thanks for watching the video.